Welcome to the Homeschool Show. I'm Melanie Willis.
And I'm Amanda Wares. And we are here to help you homeschool with confidence and joy. So, what do we have for today?
Well, we have some more what we've seen on the internet.
The internet can be a crazy place, y'all, even in the homeschool world.
But it is a good place to go and ask some questions. So it's okay to go and ask these questions.
Absolutely.
So my first one for you, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a little incident that's happened in North Carolina. What happens if all of a sudden you are slung into homeschooling?
Yes. So this happened even just recently. A school closed very unexpectedly, and so many families now are facing, okay, what do we do? So my best advice on this one is, especially if you have a junior or a senior and you really don't want to suddenly shift to another school situation, I think homeschooling is a great option in that situation. And because you can file your notice of intent quickly and easily, you could set up your homeschool in a matter of hours. And then you just go from there. For a junior or senior, I would say, especially if you've never homeschooled before, I would consider what credits does this student have left? What have they done in high school so far, and what do you want them to do for the rest of high school? And then look for resources to fill those gaps. There are so many. There are so many online classes. There are so many all kinds of book resources, tons of things that you could find. At this point, because it's so last minute, those families probably are not going to find co-op classes or community college classes. Those are probably too late. The deadline's probably passed. So if it were me in that situation, I would file my notice of intent, open my homeschool, take some time to just breathe.
That's what I was going to say, is take a minute. You don't have to do school tomorrow.
Exactly.
Take a little bit of time to discuss it with your student.
Yes.
Let them be involved. Go out onto, according to what their plan is. Are they going to go to college? Are they going to a state university? Where exactly are they going? And find out exactly what do we need.
Exactly. That is exactly right. And it's not such an emergency, like what you said. Right. You don't have to start school right that second. You can take a minute to gather yourself, do some research, talk to your student, just get your feet under you and really make a good solid plan for how you want to finish the rest of that time.
Visit our website. There's lots of good resources there and some recommendations for curriculum. There's even on the Department of Non-Public Education website, there's a little bit of a list there, some suggestions. But don't jump into anything. Take your time and make sure that it's a fit for you and for your student.
Yes, that is great advice.
Yeah.
So,
all right, so I have another question for you.
Okay.
And this one, as I was scrolling through, I saw it multiple times in a row.
Okay.
My child won't sit still.
Ooh. Yes, I've had that child.
Me too.
Yes.
Were they really meant to sit still at 6 years old?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. And I have found in my years of experience with multiple children that a lot of times, especially if they're those wiggly learners, they're little kids, they're not meant to sit still that long. And it can even impair their learning because they're focused so much on sitting still.
Right.
But then they're not actually taking anything in that you're saying. They're not actually learning because they're so focused on just staying
And that
still.
kind of makes a dominoes kind of effect, because then they're like, well, I'm not making mom happy. I'm not, and there's just so many things that start consuming their brain because they don't get to be them.
Yes, it is so true. So I have a story about this because I too, when we were early on in homeschooling, my now 23-year-old was a very wiggly kind of guy. He could not be still. And we very often would do a little schoolwork, maybe 5 or 10 minutes of sit down work, and then he would go and run. And then he'd come back, we'd sit down, do a little something, he'd go and run, and like that. Another thing that we did is I did a lot of reading aloud to my kids. I always have, and we did a lot of reading aloud even then. And he would be hanging off the couch and climbing over things and whatever. And one day I was very irritated with him, and it was driving me crazy. Why can't this kid sit still, right? I get it. I said that to myself. I said that probably to him.
I know I said it.
Yes. And at the time I would say, you are not listening.
Right.
And he said, yes, Mom, I am listening. And I said, well, if you're listening, tell me what I just said.
And he did.
He did. This child who was climbing over things and hanging off the sofa and rolling in the floor and playing with toys or whatever, he could tell me almost verbatim what I had just read. So he's taking it in. He's just not being still.
Right.
So we have to, in the homeschool world, we have so much freedom, so much flexibility to teach these children, to meet them where they are developmentally, educationally, with all the things. And we really need to own that. Like, give yourself that freedom and flexibility, and don't feel like you have to recreate the school. Exactly. Don't feel like, you are homeschooling for a reason. And if that model, which is, let me get on a little soapbox for a second, that model has been proven, especially for boys, not to work, not to work well. Don't try to recreate that in your home. Feel free. Just accept that freedom and enjoy it. Yeah. Be creative. We talked in the last episode about going on location and learning in those natural ways. There's so many options out there, so much flexibility.
Well, and that doesn't mean that we're not going to teach them structure.
No.
There's a place for that, for sure. But give yourself that freedom, because I know for me, I probably was more tied up in knots than I was even making them.
Yes.
And that's not healthy for any of us.
Absolutely not.
That fact that we feel like they have to look us in the eye to be hearing us. It's nice to have that, and we should teach them what good communication is.
Of course.
But when they're 5 and 6, 7 years old, is that how it's going to work?
Right.
Probably not.
Right. So I hope that answers some of those questions that we have seen on the internet lately.
Yeah.
Now, I am interested. I always wonder when I meet people how they came to homeschooling. How did they start homeschooling? Where did that come from for them? How did that start for them? So, Melanie, how about you? How did you start homeschooling?
It was interesting.
Okay.
It had kind of been something that I always knew about. I had family that homeschooled when I was growing up.
Okay.
And I always thought they were a little different. But they turned out great. They turned out wonderful. And then as I went to college, it just kept being one of those things that just kept coming up in my life. I kept hearing about this homeschooling thing. And eventually I ended up being a high school teacher. It's not what I went to school for, but I did. I was teaching high school and truly loved it because of my experience with the kids.
Okay.
I didn't play the politics very well in the building, but I loved my kids.
Sure.
And so then as time went on and I started having more kids, it really just had to have been God just pushing it into my head, you need to consider this. And so as I came up on having my second and third child, it was like, yeah, this is really something I'm going to look into. And we were pretty set that we were going to homeschool. Okay. And then we adopted 3 girls.
Okay.
And everything kind of, my box closed in on me. And then in other ways, the world became huge because there was just so much more of everything.
Yeah.
And initially, the first year having the girls, because we did foster to adopt, they were still considered to be in foster care. I was not allowed to homeschool them. Right. We did have to put them into school. So I had 1 year where I had 4 kids in 4 different schools.
Wow.
Not by my choice. And 3 of them had to be dropped off at the exact same time. So we had a lot of logistics that had to fall into place perfectly. And God's good. He works that stuff out.
Okay.
But by the time I was done with that year, my husband and I were like, oh, yes, we are definitely homeschooling. Not only for the fact that we wanted that time with our kids. We started realizing how much that time was every day that we weren't with our kids. And especially for the girls that were new in our family and we didn't have the bond that you would get from birth.
Sure.
We knew we needed those extra hours, that they weren't going to be going someplace else. They were going to be with us.
That's awesome.
And of course, we wanted them to learn the things that we thought were important, not necessarily the things that we thought the world thought important. And then there were some little things like all the fundraisers and keeping up with what had to go to this school when and who had to have money for this and that and the other. It was a lot. It was just so much to keep up with. And so really, I think that we made the choice from all different kinds of angles. It wasn't just, well, we want to raise them in this godly environment, or we don't want to expose them to this. It was logistics and everything.
Wow.
And so here we are, and I wouldn't have changed anything.
That's
I love
amazing. That's so awesome.
So what about you?
Okay. So my story is a little different from maybe most of the longtime homeschoolers that I meet, like the people on the NCHE board, some different people. I did not start homeschooling from the very beginning. My oldest daughter did go to school for several years. Now, reason why was because when it was time for her to go to kindergarten, I had been thinking about homeschooling a little bit. I did not know anybody that was homeschooled growing up.
Right.
I really didn't know anything about it, but it kind of started getting introduced to me as I became a parent, and she's growing up. And when it was time for her to get ready to go to kindergarten, I asked my husband, so what do you think about homeschooling? And he looked at me and he said, why in the world would I ever think about that? And so I just, at that
Put that back in that little box.
I sure did. That's exactly what I did. At that time, now, however many years later, 24 or something, we have a very different relationship than we had 24 years ago. And now would not be the way it was then. But then I just said, okay, that's it. And I didn't say another word about it for 4 years. So fast forward 4 years later, and my daughter was struggling in school. She has ADHD. She has some math, probably a math disability, and just was struggling. She was struggling socially. She was struggling academically. Her teacher was great, but the greatest teacher in the world, it's
reach
still
all students.
20-something kids, and it was very difficult. She was kind of falling through the cracks. And so the original idea was that we were going to pull her out to homeschool for 1 year. My husband said, I will let you homeschool for the 1 year to work on the math and the social skills and different things. And then we were going to put her back. And at the end of that year, I also had that wild boy that I talked about a little while ago, and I was doing some school with him. And at the end of that year, of that first year, my husband, even, who had been so against homeschooling, he really saw so much growth and good change and development in our daughter and our son that he was on board to go another year. And another factor was, like we talked about with those wiggly kids, I could not imagine my son at a traditional school, sitting in a desk for all those hours. I thought he would be in trouble every day, all day long. And so that was also a factor of it just was not going to be the right environment for him. Our daughter was doing really well. And so we really just made the decision to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say, what's really interesting to me is the reason why you start homeschooling sometimes is not the reason why you keep homeschooling.
Right.
Like a couple of years in, I think our whole family fell in love with the lifestyle of learning.
Right.
We fell in love with, just being a family
Mm-hmm.
all the time. We weren't separated many hours
Learning
a day.
together.
Learning together. And all of that. We really just fell in love with it. And it became, this is just what we do in our family.
Right.
And even though it was really important to us to include our values, our Christian values, that really wasn't a reason why we started homeschooling, but it certainly became really important over the years.
And it's interesting how people's thoughts change. Your husband's changed over that school year. And of course, we have all the grandparents and the different things and how they change over the years. Because, of course, there's a lot of questions, just so many questions from the grandparents. And now, at least for mine, there's a drastic change. They're like, oh, yes, don't put them in public school. Keep them home. That's what you want to do. And honestly, I didn't mention I had my oldest son did go to public school up until high school.
Okay.
And because he was from my first marriage. And so I did have to not only get him home, but convince not only the grandparents, but a former spouse that this is what we needed to do. And in the end, I think after him seeing us with our other kids, he was the one that came and said, I think that this would be a really good idea for you to do.
Wow.
So, you never know how you can change people's minds.
It's so true.
And it's so important to do what's right for your family.
Exactly. It really, really is. I love that.
Yes, I enjoyed that.
I know,
Thanks for telling me your story.
Yes.
So, Homeschool Helps with Amanda. What do you have for us today?
Today, I have something that is very personal to me. We have experienced. It's what do you do when you find you need to pivot in your homeschool?
Done a lot of that.
And this does happen. It happens a lot. And so in the past year, I've told on this show many times, I have one son left at home. He is 15. So last year, he was starting high school, and I made a plan for him for the whole school year, and it was very hands-off for me.
Mm-hmm.
So he was doing the idea was that he would be very independent. Okay. It was a disaster.
That happens.
It was a disaster. I had an entire plan. I had classes paid for. I had curriculum bought. And it was an utter disaster. He was not ready for that level of independence. He really still needed much more of my coaching, my teaching, and so we had to pivot in a big way, a big pivot to, okay, now what does this look like where mom is still right there?
Right.
Because he still needed mom beside him more of the time than I thought in the beginning. And so what I made my plans based on did not work. And we changed. I said, and I had to go to him and say this, I was wrong. I made a mistake. This isn't working. We are going to change. And we're going to do this. We're going to do it this way now. And it's been beautiful. So much better ever since then. And this year I did not go that far, So far so good this year. But that's just one tiny example of a pivot. But there could be so many things. Maybe you picked a certain curriculum
that just did not work.
And it just doesn't work. Yes, I've done it too. And you have to not be afraid. Don't feel like a failure. Just be able to own it and say, okay, this wasn't right for us. It wasn't right for that student, or it wasn't right for our family. And
even the co-op that you choose to go to.
Yes, absolutely.
Things I've had a lot of experience with that. And I know I got pretty involved and spent some decent money to get involved in a co-op and get my kids special dance clothes that was part of that class and other equipment that they needed for classes. And I really realized at that point in time, I couldn't take a whole day away from my home.
Right.
I needed them at home. And, nowadays that's different. We're at a different place and that's
Sure.
different. But during that time, yeah, I had to just finally go to them and sit down and have the family meeting and say, is this really working for us right now? And almost unanimously, the kids were like, no, it's not.
Okay.
And it's you were talking about planning out that year. And I know I have somebody that lives nearby here that she plans out her entire school year, 180 days perfectly. She has every piece of equipment she needs, every piece of paper, everything to do her 180 days of school.
Oh, wow.
And I can't imagine. And so there was one year that I was like, I'm really going to do some planning this year.
Okay.
But I literally was planning, 4 to 6 weeks at a time.
Sure.
And what I found for me was every time I did that, the world would just go crazy. And that plan was kaput. And I felt like I'd wasted so much time and I spent so much more time trying to realign the plan. And so I really got to the point, I was like, okay, this isn't working. So once my kids were mostly independent, the ones that were, we might do a week at a time where I would sit down with each one of them and write down, this is what I expect you to accomplish during this week.
Yes.
And that's kind of where things ended up for most of them.
Okay.
Because me planning in advance did not work.
And the beautiful thing about that, again, with homeschooling, that freedom and flexibility that I feel like I harp on all the time, is that you and me and your friend that's such a planner, you are free to make it work for you.
Yeah.
And if you are that planner and you need all that plan made, then that's wonderful. And if you get in the situation, you see that that's just not working, don't be afraid to pivot.
That's right. That's very good. So last week you spoke to us quite a bit about the benefits of being a member of NCHE, and you gave us those level 1 benefits.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about level 2.
Okay. So level 2 is $75 a year. Still a bargain when you think about how much things cost these days. It's still a bargain. For that $75, you get every single one of those benefits of level 1 that I told you about in the last episode. If you missed it, go check it out.
Or go to the website. It's all right there.
It sure is. Exactly. But level 2 has additional things. 1, you get, instead of just 1 mentor session for free, you get 3 of them, which is...
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
Really
That's
good.
a $90 value right there. And then you also get a bundle of recordings from Thrive, which are amazing. You get 5 recordings, which is also incredible. So much learning, so much just equipping. It's great.
It really adds up.
And I think it's really wonderful to, when you join NCHE, that not only are you doing something that's great for you and great for your family, but you are also supporting all homeschool families in the state of North Carolina. Like that $75 or $35, whatever it is really funding this organization that keeps watch on the legislative stuff that's coming out all the time, that really does all these things to support all homeschoolers in the state of North Carolina.
I mean, I'm a homeschool mom. I don't have time to go out there and be paying attention every day of what's happening in legislative type stuff to figure out those laws. And so it's really nice to have NCHE to do that for me.
Absolutely.
And to know that they're batting for me.
Yes.
Doing, I think it's, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm so glad that I'm part of NCHE.
Me too. All right. Last but not least, if you have a favorite vendor, a favorite curriculum provider, a favorite any organization, something like that, that you want to see in the vendor hall at Thrive, send them the link to our vendor application. It is up. It is open. if you go just on the homepage of nche.com, you scroll down a little bit, there's a little button that says vendor application, and just send it out. You have a favorite curriculum provider you want to see at Thrive, send it to them and say, I want to see your company represented at this conference. That would
really helps. It helps us so much to have more things to put our hands on.
Yes.
And, you know, if a vendor knows that they're wanted, that helps even more.
It really does. And I feel like when you are a customer of a certain company, a certain vendor, and you say to them, we love your company, we love your products, we want to see you there, that really makes a difference.
I think that makes a big difference. And they enjoy hearing that they're wanted.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for you today. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can always reach out to us at the Homeschool Show at nche.com. You can also please like, subscribe. You can find us on YouTube. You can also find us anywhere you get your podcasts.
Share us with all your friends.
Absolutely. And as always, we want you to homeschool with confidence and joy.
Welcome to North Carolinians for Home Education. No, that's not it. Welcome to something.
Welcome to
the Homeschool Show.
There you go. You want me to start?
No.
Oh, we need a bloopers.
Don't we need some? Give them all to Matthew.
Yes.
Okay.